So, welcome to Craftcast, the Freemasons podcast, and I'm here with
James
and Sean,
and of course myself, Stephen. Nice to see you. Well, you guys at least.
Is it nice to see us? He wasn't very convinced there, was he?
It for a
Hang on a
second.
minute. Is it nice to see us?
I questioned it for a second. Nice to see you guys. How are we?
Pretty good, thank you, actually. Had a nice journey in today into the lovely recording studio here at Freemasons Hall. Got an installation in my province. Looking forward to that tomorrow as a Provincial Deputy DC, and going to Ireland for a little work trip next week. So a couple of busy days coming up.
You do get about, don't you?
I do get about
fog.
in my professional life. In fact, we're 5 months into the year now. I think I've spent more time out of the UK this year than in it.
Wow.
Yeah.
But not in Europe, because you're only allowed, or at least in Gibraltar, we're only allowed 90 days in Europe, so that's fun.
Yeah, US, Europe, all over the place, really. And it's quite nice to come home and to do some Freemasonry, actually. It's a nice grounding base being at home, back in familiar terrain.
I, this evening, will be off to a lodge social. So we're going to go for some drinks, and then I'm probably going to find a Nando's.
Cheeky Nando's.
You know what? I haven't had a Nando's in ages, and I am having withdrawal symptoms.
Well, Mr. Watley over here. Or as I should say, worshipful brother Watley. He's a student used to cheeky Nando's, but we call you worshipful brother, Stephen, because quite a momentous event has happened since we last spoke to you.
Yeah, indeed. Since the last time we spoke, my father installed me as master of my mother lodge. Thank you, guys. Yeah, it was a really incredible day. The whole thing, in fact, the whole week was really quite something. Have visitors coming over from the UK and put on some, like a rock tour for them of the Gibraltar, the rock that we have there, dolphin safari, all sorts.
Sorry, when you said a rock tour, I thought you were sort of going to say, he's a Freddie Mercury impressionist or something.
No, of the Rock of Gibraltar. Yeah.
I really wanted to go, and thank you so much for inviting both of us. Unfortunately, work just meant that I couldn't make it. Yeah. But when you sent me the programme for the week, like a dolphin safari, a rock tour, dinner nights, go
certainly
to this
because it wasn't attractive, was it?
I mean, it was just the most fun-packed week. It sounds like you had a great time.
It really was, and also for me in particular, like as I said, it wasn't just I was installed, my father installed me, and that was really incredibly emotional for him and for me.
Well, I was just going to ask you that because we've spoken on a previous episode, and I kind of said to you, there is a moment where you will get emotional and he will get emotional. And it sounds like that happened, right? Yeah,
for sure. And I mean...
No spoilers.
No, but I mean, in a similar way to in the initiation where he first called me brother, and I will never forget that he sort of got choked up just before he said it, and he did the same thing when he said, worshipful master for the first time to me. And that was really special. And on top of it, to something that was really nice, I think I've never really seen that happen before. After an investiture, I invested my father first as DC and said, I'm sure you're well adept at bossing me around and maintaining order, so you'll be great. And then I also invested him as mentor. And for mentor, I prepared in the Lodge of Instruction, in the preparation, the rehearsals, I said all of my investitures and practiced them. But the one that I didn't practice was the one to my dad, because I wanted to make sure he did not know what I was going to say. And it got to it, and I knew it off by heart, and it got to it. And I said, I'm sorry, guys, I'm just going to have to read this because there's no way I'm getting through it. And so I read this short piece that I'd prepared for him and really got choked up, and I had to stop several times because I was almost fighting through the emotion. And then everyone just broke into a round of applause afterwards. It was really special for me, that moment.
It sounds like an amazing moment. And actually, it's a very good segue talking about mentoring, because, Brother Sean, what are we talking about on this episode of Craftcast?
Well, Brother James, we are talking to Anthony Howlett-Bolton, the Provincial Grand Master for Berkshire and the chairman of the Learning and Development Group here at UGLE, and to Omaid Hiwaizi, who is the Metropolitan Grand Communications Officer and the project lead for Solomon Live. And they're going to be talking to us about Solomon, the virtual learning platform, and we're going to be digging into it and finding out what it can offer to you as a Freemason, and indeed to those of you who are not Freemasons.
Which is essentially an online platform for mentoring.
Absolutely. Shall we get into it?
Let's do it.
Let's go.
Anthony, Omaid, very great to have you on Craftcast today. Thank you for coming in to see us.
Lovely to be here with you.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks for inviting us on.
Let's jump straight into it, shall we? Can you give our listeners a bit of context? What is Solomon and why was it created in the first place?
Solomon's a virtual learning environment. It's basically a central repository for learning material. It was created because several years ago a survey was done from Freemasons, and as a result of that it was realized that there was no central repository for information. Lots of information is up on the internet, some of it's accurate, some of it's less accurate, and we needed to have something credible from a UGLE point of view that people could go to for learning and development.
Another way of putting it is it was a way for members or brethren to get or brethren and companions, I should say, to get their daily advancement in Masonic knowledge.
Mm-hmm. And what sort of stuff is on Solomon? You talked about it being a virtual learning environment. What kind of learning can the Freemason or the non-Freemason achieve by going and using it?
It explains everything that's going on, why we do various things, why things are laid out in lodge rooms as they are. It's not esoteric, it's not heavy, it's designed to be really easy for people to dip in and out of, and that's why a lot of the content is in nugget form, simple presentations.
It's very consumable, I'd say, very consumable for Masons to just go in.
That's the idea.
And learn through a very interactive way rather than just reading a block and a wall of text. It's very interactive. I mean,
you talk about interactive, that's something we've been working on really quite a lot, the gamification element. I must admit my eyebrows went up when they first talked to me about gamification. But it does seem to be the way forward, and lots of people are working through the modules, getting badges and accreditation, which is fabulous. And we do actually give people a certificate if they work through all the modules.
I should add that it's organised in useful, let's say, episodes or chunks around the different degrees or different kind of dimensions and angles of what people might be interested in, so they can progress through in a kind of methodical way if they want to do all of it. But then if people dip in, there are papers which are slightly longer form and nuggets which are short form. And as Anthony said, some of them have been converted into interactive units. Some of those interactive units have voiceovers. So while the core of it is PDFs, like, short and longer form PDFs, actually there's an increasing amount of interacting, engaging content as well, and that's a deliberate move into that direction. That's a deliberate plan.
So a sort of internal UGLE question. Solomon sits under learning and development, doesn't it, Anthony? Why is learning and development so important to UGLE, and not just to UGLE, but also to a regular Freemason?
Well, because Freemasonry is unique, is rich in history and tradition. And if you don't understand that, then you're not really getting the full benefit from it. If you just join Freemasonry and you learn your ritual and you deliver it, you may or may not deliver it in a meaningful form. This is all about understanding for the person who's being initiated, the subject of the ceremony. They've got to understand what it's about. And if you don't understand it when you're learning it and you're delivering it, you're not going to be able to do it in an intelligible form. So it's very much around developing understanding and also fostering curiosity, because why would you join a unique organization like Freemasonry and not know anything about its traditions, why we do things in the way they do, what makes us unique? You might as well join another organization where you can just have dinner and a chat.
The reality as well is the more that a typical Mason knows as he or she actually goes along their journey, the further engaged they are and the more they get out of it, because actually quite a lot of the symbolism and so on you can miss, and Solomon's a really good way to understand particular aspects and angles. But also for the real nerds, you can get into real detail, like almost like academic level detail.
He looked at you and he said that, Stephen.
One of the things that we do in my mother lodge, actually, and we've done it since the lodge was consecrated 80 odd years ago, is we always do a daily advancement in Masonic knowledge, a very short piece towards the end of the meeting. And since Solomon went live a few years ago, we've taken some of those shorter nuggets from Solomon and used those as an opportunity for a new brother to stand up and speak in open lodge and to deliver some education work, and we found that to work surprisingly well, actually.
And it builds huge confidence amongst for the person that's doing it.
Yes.
I must admit, we've had to change really our thinking, because when we first started Solomon, we were thinking very much about it being used in lodges, because previously, if there was nothing to do, somebody would do some sort of lecture or other, or narration or whatever it might be. And we started down thinking that the ideal place to deliver this would be in lodges. But really, we've changed our thinking a bit, because the reality is there's an awful lot of people waiting to be initiated into Freemasonry, and they're passed and raised. So we're always competing against the ritual that needs to take place to move Freemasonry forward. So we're very much now focusing on building communities and self-learning, and that's why we've done welcome modules, so that if you are initiated, passed and raised, there's a module especially for you, as Omaid was saying. It's tailor-made, it's salami sliced, if I can put it that way.
And exalted into the Royal Arch as well.
Absolutely exalted into the Royal Arch, and I ought to say that the Royal Arch is a major part of Solomon. It always has been, and I'm extremely excited with the developments that are about to be announced with the Royal Arch, with the new strategy that talks about the integration of the Royal Arch and being one organisation. There is ample opportunity to research that in Solomon, and we're going to be looking over the summer at everything we've got on the Royal Arch and making sure it's absolutely consistent, looking to see where we've got gaps and what more we can do, because Royal Arch is really quite exciting.
Can I just say, companions out there, the more basic papers and nuggets on the Royal Arch are really, really insightful. There's so much symbolism in that. Just read the first 2 or 3 and you'll get a lot more out of being in your chapter.
I was going to say, actually, when I first joined chapter, I very much enjoyed the ceremony, but then shortly afterwards found myself a little bit almost disenfranchised, just a little bit. Like, I'd go and it was fine, but I wasn't particularly enthusiastic when I first joined. And then I read a lot of the Solomon module on the Royal Arch, and we had a convocation where we had nothing going on. We didn't have a ceremony, and it was a cancellation last minute, so there was nothing else prepared either, and it was about 2 days before, and I went, you know what, I'm going to have a read. And I put together a lecture on why the Royal Arch is important to young Freemasons, and delivered it purely on my take on the module that you guys had presented. So I could definitely vouch for it being extremely interesting, and since then I found that ceremony so much more interesting, because I understand so much more about it purely by using that.
I mean, 2 things come from that. I mean, clearly a lot of people have done work, and as you've said yourself, you've done presentations. I'm always pleased to see them, because we're looking to increase the material and make sure that it's really relevant. But when all this started, it was Royal Arch companions that drove the desire to improve. It wasn't craft masons. The real emphasis came from the Royal Arch, saying we want to know more, and so they were the ones who really kick this off in the first place.
It's interesting to hear you talking actually about what Stephen said there, and the idea of you taking that presentation perhaps and using it, because one of the questions I was curious about was, where do you get the content from? Who creates it? Where does it come from?
And can we contribute, I guess? Can people contribute to it?
They can absolutely contribute to it in any way or form. There are some safeguards that we have to do for UGLE, because a lot of the material that we had when we first started, all of which came from provinces, and districts, and I know there's a lot more out there that we haven't even looked at, but we do have to ensure that the copyright is right, and where there are photographs that we've got those copyright agreements, the red tape, and that slowed us up for quite a while, because we had to go through absolutely everything, because a lot of it had been put together by people and plagiarized, if I put it that way, and we really have to make sure that we protect the organisation.
You talk about copyright and plagiarism as one obstacle to overcome. Is there a possibility of another obstacle being the accuracy of information provided to you? How do we know that this theory in this lecture is actually got some, cadence behind it?
That's a really good question, because we are not advancing a UGLE position. What we are providing is a credible explanation, and the idea is that people can discuss it and take it apart and rebuild it as they want.
And really learn and develop both the theory and their own knowledge of it.
Because a lot of it is lost in the history. But all of the papers have been reviewed by, I say in inverted commas, experts, to make sure that they are credible. And we have a content manager and a whole lot of experts in craft and the Royal Arch who do that work for us.
I mean, to their credit, the papers are written and the nuggets are written in such a way as to they're couched as theories and so on, and they talk about alternatives and what might be, and so it does give you that kind of vivid picture.
They're like real academic papers. Yeah.
Well,
like,
to some extent, without the length, let's say.
For me, I think Solomon fills a gap if you sort of plug in gaps within that member experience. And something when I was initiated in 2015 that I felt was lacking. I remember I had my initiation, and I vividly remember laying in bed that night thinking, what on earth was that? What on earth did I experience there? I had no clue, and no one had taken the time to sit me down or approach me at the festive board and say, if you want to know more about what you've just experienced, speak to someone or look it up here. And I think Solomon is such a useful resource in that sense, because it's all there. And you can go on and you can find out about it. You can read about the symbolism and the meaning behind what you've just experienced. And that's hugely valuable, because I felt like, and not to do a disservice to my mother lodge, but I felt like that didn't really happen to me in that instance. And I was just sort of left to go on and, right, come back in a few months for your second.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things that come to mind for that is firstly, often you're not told because people don't know.
Yes,
it's as simple as that.
True,
And one of the things we thought about in the very early days is how do we get this out without causing embarrassment to senior Masons who may or may not have a view and being asked questions they can't answer. And so Solomon is there to be really, really flexible. And it's saved my bacon several times, because when people ask me a question I haven't got a clue about the answer to, I simply say, well, have you looked on Solomon? If you've looked on Solomon, you can't find the answer, come back.
Yeah.
And they never come back, of course, because there will be an answer on Solomon.
Absolutely. And Omaid, I'm sure a lot of listeners would have seen or at least heard of Solomon Live, which is a different dimension to Solomon's offering. Could you talk to us a little bit about what Solomon Live is and why it was started in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, if I start with the why we started it. So Anthony asked me to join the learning and development team to help with promotion of Solomon, and I focused on social media. We built up a Facebook account and a Twitter account. And actually during lockdown, it was a great opportunity to share quite a lot of content, and actually there'd be posts talking to a particular topic with a picture and driving traffic to a particular paper or nugget.
And people had more time to go and read it as well.
People had more time, yeah. And actually for some period we're doing it daily. That's quite kind of rapid fire, quite a lot going on, people commenting about how often it was coming. But one thing I noticed was that typically some posts which are on kind of quite popular topics like the Royal Family would get a reach of 10 to 50,000, whereas others which are on details, so for instance, the shape of the columns or a description of the virtues would get a reach of, maybe more 3,000. And I thought there was something in it. Also, what was happening during lockdown was quite a lot of webinars were going on where they were on fairly obscure topics and there weren't that many people attending and they weren't particularly professionally produced. So we talked, the team talked, and we invented this idea of Solomon Live, which were live webinars delivered on accessible topics with a view of interacting, being very, very engaging in the format and driving large numbers of people to follow live as well as later on catch up. And then the call to action at the end is go register on Solomon, go back to Solomon. And so it was a different way to, let's say, grow the surface area of Solomon through different kinds of Masonic knowledge in a very accessible way, and then drive traffic back to the platform. And it works very well to do that. We're now doing number 24, so we've kept it going for a couple of years. And the next one, and I don't know when this will be broadcast, but the next one is meet the Assistant Grandmaster David Medlock. So in that instance, we're talking about his role in UGLE, who he is as a person, and that's the daily advancement, is understanding how that works. Following that, we've got different topics coming up, and we kind of come at it from different angles all the time.
I think that really plays as well to the idea that if you think about the principles of adult learning, people learn in different ways. Some people prefer to read, some people prefer to watch, some people prefer to listen. And it looks like at the moment Solomon has got a number of different ways, either through Solomon Live or videos or the nuggets of delivering that information, depending on what the consumer, the student wants to take in.
It's all designed for the consumer. And that's why I have specialists. I mean, I've got a superb team working for me. I just conduct the orchestra. They know what they're doing, including psychologists and university lecturers. So when we started with Solomon, it was very text oriented. We had to start somewhere, but now, of course, we're trying to make it more visual. Everything that we do, so the Solomon Lives that Omaid does, which are absolutely superb, are now audio files as well, because some people like to listen to them in the car, and certainly some of the things I do, when I'm doing the washing up or whatever it may be, I'm not actually looking at a screen, and so it needs to be in that digestible form. So we are continually looking to repackage, repurpose, make sure it's relevant, make sure it's vibrant. That's why we're going to have Solomon Shorts, the things that just appear on your mobile phone, you can look at or not, but bite-sized stuff. But it all is underpinned by more substantial material.
Yeah, when it happens, this Solomon Shorts or Solomon Light, we'll decide what it's called. It's going to be really, really cool, because it's not there yet. But imagine having an app on your phone and actually, on the frequency you choose, getting push notifications saying, here's a sentence, like a social media post, here's a sentence or two on a topic and a picture or maybe a short video, and click through if you want to know more. So mostly you just dismiss it, but you've picked something up every day or once a week.
Also, you could be, easily bored on a bus, and you find yourself, instead of playing on a silly game on your phone, you just go, I'm going to have a read of this.
Yeah.
Certainly I like this idea of it being consumable in a very modern way.
Yeah.
In sort of a, I'll put it this way, if my university had my course in some capacity in that way in an app, I would learn a lot more.
I mean, so this is one of the things about Solomon Live as well, which is that how do you, and actually the content on the platform, at one end of the scale, it feels like education. At the other end of the scale, it feels like entertainment. And actually, where do we sit depending on
There's got to be some
what
balance
people are
between them, yeah.
And we've got to remember that half of our audience are international. And I know you come from Gibraltar, so the districts are not ignored with this.
Yeah.
And so we're picking up at the moment of half of our new users are coming from abroad. So everything we do is international. And so we've got to be marketing for them as well.
I'm glad you talked about that, actually, Anthony, because I was going to ask you about maybe if you could share some statistics with us. So how many people are using Solomon? How frequently are they using it?
Yeah, well, at the moment, we've got just about 44,000 people, just over 44,000 people registered. And we tend to get about 400 additional people every single month. And monthly usage is about 15,000 sessions with 10,000 users. So, it's not insignificant. Omaid has made a tremendous difference on the social media front, and he can talk about Facebook and Twitter. But, I mean, we've got 11,000 on Facebook and nearly 5,000 on Twitter, I think.
Yeah. I mean, so the social platforms have really grown, and actually, to Anthony's point, once in a while we get a big hit. There's a video that I posted once or twice of the Initiate song being sung by some brethren in Southwest, and that links through to a paper on the Initiate song. And every time you post that, it gets 50, 60,000 reach, and it's amazing.
I mean, we get our critics as well, So thinking of the Initiate song, I can remember being beaten up by somebody saying, you're ruining it for everybody else. And I'm saying, well, do you actually sing it in your lodge? And if you don't, now you know how it should be done. Make it available for everybody.
Well, I guess that was actually for my curveball question. I guess I was thinking this already. How do you keep it? And sort of obviously, Freemasonry is a very open organisation, but there are certain things that we don't. We don't want someone to know how a ceremony exactly goes before they've been through it. Otherwise, it ruins the journey for them.
Absolutely.
So how do you keep that almost restricted in some capacity from one level to the next?
This was quite an issue for us when we started. Firstly, the passwords are never included in any shape or form. Secondly, as you said, a lot of stuff is already out there on the internet. And you can read it if you want to read it, whether it be accurate or not. It doesn't matter. So what we have done within Solomon is put lots of warning notices, because I don't know who's a fellow craft and who's in the Royal Arch. So we simply say, well, if you're going to look at this and you're not there, you're probably going to ruin your experience. Yeah. But the truth of the matter is that it is the experience that happens in the lodge or the chapter room which makes the ceremony absolutely unique. You can read it till you're blue in the face, you can rehearse it, and that's why when people try and reproduce our ceremonies, actors do, as they have done over past, they always find it very difficult, and it's always not quite right, and the reason it's not, because they don't have that atmosphere. So we will never be reproducing that, and it's that experience that you get in your chapter or lodge room that really makes the difference. And so it's important, as we started with this, to understand and know what the ritual is about and be able able to deliver it in some shape or form for the candidate.
It's a little bit like you could try and reproduce it, but you couldn't quite get the atmosphere. You can't be what Freemasonry is by reproducing it. I guess is exactly.
It's cold when you when you look at it.
Okay, so now for my actual scheduled question rather than a curveball one. What role does Solomon itself play for the lodge mentor? I assume it's quite rather useful for a lodge mentor.
Well, it's very much around what we've been talking about. I am absolutely passionate about mentoring. I think everybody should be mentored as they go through their Masonic journey, and one mentor does not fit the whole size of somebody's Masonic journey. And what it does is it allows the mentor to be able to focus somebody where they need to be. It allows the individual to go down their own individual place, their journey, and then go back to their mentor and ask questions and explanations.
For guidance and advice,
But there are three golden threads as far as I'm concerned. One is the quality of the individual, getting the right people into Freemasonry and giving them a really wonderful experience so they feel that they belong at the very first moment. The second is around the mentoring, which we've just talked about, and the third is about learning and development. And if those three become a triple helix, then you're going to get a really good candidate.
For example, my father is the lodge mentor. I actually just invested him as my lodge mentor, and
was that a wise choice?
well, we'll find out, I guess. No, but for him, I'm biased, but I think he's a great mentor in general. But what would be your advice to a lodge mentor of how to use this platform for their junior brethren?
We have a particular module in there called Mentors Corner. And that is designed to point the mentors in the right direction. Of course, they can always communicate with us in Solomon, because you can write direct to Solomon and you'll get a response. So my advice would be look at Mentors Corner, look at the welcome modules, because they are specifically designed for those individuals, and take it from there.
I'd say to a mentor that it's quite a good idea to get your EAs and fellow crafts or whoever to all read a particular paper or experience something and then have a discussion afterwards. That could be before a Levi, for instance, or something like that, and actually them all having read the same thing and discussing it, the learning happens in the discussion.
I think in a similar way that the lodge mentor can point EAs and fellow crafts, etc., to these particular modules, potentially a master investing their mentor officer could say, go and look at Mentors Corner as well. So that might be, potentially a useful bit of a
But where mentors get it wrong, lodge mentors often get it wrong, is you need individual personal mentors. A lodge mentor cannot do it. If you've got a successful lodge with half a dozen people progressing through, however good you are, you're not going to be able to deliver it. Personal mentoring is absolutely vital, and we've got to give more help and guidance in that area.
Thank you, Anthony. Moving on, for those of you that are listening, I'm sure you've heard about UGLE's new 7-year strategy, Freemasonry 2022 and beyond. Could you give us an insight, please, into how learning and development is delivering the strategy, how it's assisting with that rollout of UGLE's new strategy?
Yeah, I mean, it fits like a glove, is the answer, because it aids attraction. Because it has elements for people who are not yet Freemasons and they're interested and they can do their own research. And our experience is a lot of people joining provinces and districts now through social media do their research in the first place. So it's an area they can look at. It certainly aids retention for the reasons that we've been talking about understanding. It educates and informs people about our history and our traditions. It provides a deeper understanding. We've talked about the Royal Arch and the importance of that being integral. It does an awful lot, because the Royal Arch is a little bit more complex to understand, and so it plays that role there. It enhances two-way communication, which is part of the strategy, and it fosters curiosity and develops understanding. So it really has key roles to play in attraction and retention.
Yeah,
I must say that I spent a bit of time with Anthony just after the strategy was released. In fact, we drove up to a meeting in the Midlands. Actually, it was a meeting where we were both being invited by the Solomon Live host, Brodie Swain, I should have mentioned earlier. I won't mention too much about him, but let's say one of the reasons why Solomon Live is really good is that he's a really professional
Love
host.
Brodie. He's great, yeah.
But we were driving up, and Anthony may object to me saying this, but he looked quite worried because one of the pillars was learning and development, and his reaction was, we've really got to get our act together.
Yeah. We're almost coming to the end, unfortunately. Time is always against us on these things. I just want to pick up on something Stephen said, and you talked about with regard to the mentor, because I think it's important to say that, I think you've alluded to this, Solomon's a great tool, but it's not a substitute either for a good personal mentor and a good lodge mentor. It complements.
Absolutely it does. It absolutely does. It's not a replacement. It's an added bonus. But it is somewhere where you can go and you can get something credible and you can find and discover things for yourself. And ideally, it will take you on your own, help you along your own journey, wherever that may take you.
And what are the future plans for Solomon?
Well, I'm always excited about Solomon, and it'll never be perfect. And what we are really, and I tried to allude to earlier, what we're always looking at feedback. We're always looking at what's going on in the market. We are working heavily now on gamification. We're looking to integrate, obviously, with UGLE systems, so it becomes as seamless as possible, because the less clicks we can do. And Omaid will talk more about that than I do. But one thing that I'm really excited about, that did come out of the car journey with Omaid, was I thought he was going to put me in a corner and dust me off, was I was really keen on AI, and I wanted, and I do want AI in Solomon, and it is going to be possible. Don't ask me exactly when, but we're working on it. We got it in our sandbox. We're playing with it, and we'll see how that develops. But it's a fast-moving environment.
You've said gamification a few times. Could you explain for listeners who might not quite understand what exactly that means?
Well, I'm not sure I totally understand what it means, but it means it's coming away from the tried and tested simple way of rote learning, but doing things and getting badges and awards and certificates. And making it more modern, so that it appeals to modern man, because people just don't sit and learn like they used to. I mean, when I started learning, it was all rote. And actually, that's one of the things that's affecting the delivery of the ritual. People don't know how to learn in that way anymore. So we've got to be vibrant, and we've got to be fresh, and we've got to take the sound bites. We talked about Solomon Live and the importance, and that came about because I got a telephone call from the then Grand Secretary. He said, look, we're going into lockdown. What the hell are we going to be doing here to keep people interested? What can you do? Which was an interesting question. So we accelerated some of our program with regard to that. But Solomon Live, as you alluded to earlier, was because people had the time. Now, of course, they haven't got the time because they're out and about doing other things. So that's why we're finding it's more important
now you have to
stream.
adapt again. Yeah.
Adapt again to stream. That's why it's important to get the audio. And we've got to chunk the stuff up as well. But Omaid, you may have thoughts on me.
Well, the just to dwell a moment on gamification, where it comes into the platform is that in the interactive elements, for instance, a paper's broken down into several pieces, and you look at each piece and you kind of get a badge of recognition as you go through it all, and it's very motivational to get to the end and get all of the badges, and there's an increasing amount of that being looked in. The team are developing in different aspects, so for instance, if you complete a whole module, you get some kind of recognition for having done that.
Yeah, wonderful.
Can I make one final comment? Because we need to not lose sight of the fact that Solomon is a tool. Solomon is not learning and development. It is a tool to deliver learning and development. And one of the programs we're working on really closely and quickly now is trying to make it available in districts and in provinces, and helping the new provincial Grand Learning and Development Officers deliver their work. And we're chunking it up into the regional communications group. So we're developing WhatsApp groups and so on, so we can interact with them and provide them with that guidance and help. And that will help us as well, because we'll get even more feedback, and then we'll look and see what we need to do. But it's a very small, tight team of enthusiasts, and I'm hugely grateful for what they've achieved so far.
What I'd say as well is that totally welcome ideas, particularly from my point of view, for Solomon Live topics, to make sure that they're really, really relevant. To give you a sense of it, we make sure we cover the Royal Arch a couple of times a year, try and do 12 a year, couple of times the Royal Arch, involve the women's Grand Lodges, speak to the districts, have some of it which is talking to the, let's say the on-highs, and then other Solomon Lives which are talking to the regular brethren and companions, and just trying to make sure it's a proper reflection of where Freemasonry is going and the membership.
Well, if you feel like talking from someone to Gibraltar, hi.
Don't need any more airtime, Stephen. Omaid, Anthony, thank you very much for your time. It's been absolutely fascinating to speak to you, and hopefully you'll agree to come and speak to us again soon.
Thank you.
Very happy to do that.
And talking about listeners from odd places that perhaps we wouldn't expect, I'd like to take this opportunity to give a shout out to our listener in Vatican City. Hello. Welcome. We hope you enjoy it. Please do stay with us. And if you're listening and you want to get in touch, we'd love to have you on. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. If you would like to find out more about Solomon, you can check out at solomon.ugle.org.uk. You can sign in, be it a Freemason or a non-Freemason, and find out more about our wonderful craft. You can also follow them on social media at Solomon UGLE. And of course, tune in to a future edition of Solomon Live, or view any old episodes on the United Grand Lodge of England YouTube channel. As ever, it's been an absolute pleasure to be with you, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Craftcast, the Freemasons podcast. The podcast is hosted by Sean Butler, Stephen Watley, and James Dalton. The producer is Marta Zandri, and the podcast is edited by Trisonic.